What if everything you thought you knew about the Bible's beginning was incomplete? Before the first words of Genesis were spoken, before light pierced the darkness, there existed something Scripture has hidden from us for thousands of years. Not chaos, not emptiness, but thrones, ancient and untouched, filled with beings so powerful that heaven itself chose to bury their memory. They weren't angels. They weren't demons. They were kings who existed before time began, and they refused to kneel. This hidden story, buried between the lines of Scripture, reveals a cosmic drama that changes everything about how we understand our place in God's plan. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you might be the most important biblical revelation you've never heard. The realm before Genesis, the Bible begins with creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But what if those heavens weren't empty when God said, "Let there be light"? What if they were already watching, waiting, shifting? In Job 38, 4-7, God hints at what Genesis leaves unspoken. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Who were these sons of God shouting as creation began? What were they shouting for? Or what had just been taken from them? Before Eden, before humanity, before even Lucifer's rebellion, there existed kings, eternal, undying entities that weren't flesh, weren't fallen, weren't angels. They were thrones made sentient, rulers forged in divine order. The Scriptures whisper of them as sons of God, as gods, as holy ones. But these names merely scratch the surface of their true nature. They were sovereigns, existing not to serve, but to govern. Not rulers of people or planets, but of alignment, structure, and purpose within the unseen realm. Their rule wasn't conquest, it was origin. They didn't fight for dominion, they were dominion itself. Their existence preceded structure. Their thrones were written into the very bones of reality. They sat not above creation, but before it, outside of time, outside of story, and yet necessary to it. The divine counsel revealed. In Psalm, you catch a fleeting glimpse of this hidden reality. God stands in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. These words do not come from myth, nor legend. They come from the mouth of Yahweh himself. The council existed. The thrones were real. But they are no longer spoken of. Something happened, something no prophet wrote in full, something no apostle dared utter. When God resolved to begin again, to speak light into being, to shape a creature in his own image, to create not rulers but sons, the thrones trembled. Not all, but some. And in that trembling was a decision that would alter everything that followed. The silent refusal. When the voice that had existed in solitude began to speak again, creation held its breath. A new design had been declared. A world not of thrones, but of gardens. A being not crowned in glory, but formed from dust, a creature that would carry not dominion, but the image of God himself. What happened next wasn't rebellion. There was no thunder, no lightning, no fall like Lucifer's. There was only stillness. And in that stillness, a choice was made without words. They would not kneel. It wasn't hatred that held them upright. It wasn't pride or ambition. It was conviction. They had existed before time, ruled before flesh. Their sovereignty wasn't ambition, it was order itself. And now, the voice that once enthroned them had chosen to elevate another. Not a divine being, not a spirit of flame, but man, mortal, fragile, incomplete. For them, it wasn't betrayal. It was confusion. How could dust reflect the image of the infinite? In Isaiah 14, verse 13-14, we read of Lucifer's arrogance. I will ascend to heaven. I will set my throne on high. I will make myself like the Most High. But these eternal thrones had no need to ascend. They were already placed high. They didn't covet God's place. They had been appointed to theirs. Now, something had changed. God wasn't asking for their throne. He was asking for their submission, not to himself, but to a design that made man the center of his affection. To bow before that, they could not. Not out of pride, but out of essence. To kneel would be to undo themselves, to surrender the eternal to the temporal, the glorious to the grounded. It was, to them, unthinkable. The burial of a kingdom. In heaven, refusal is never passive. To stand when God calls you to bow is to stand against him, whether you raise a sword or not. They didn't speak, but heaven heard them clearly. What Yahweh planned wasn't a court, it was a covenant, a creation where love would outrank hierarchy, where the last would be first, where kings would serve, where thrones would be replaced by crosses. And in that world, the eternal kings found no place. They weren't wicked, they were simply incompatible, and that was enough. What happened next wasn't war. There was no clash of wings, no fire from heaven. When the thrones refused to kneel, heaven didn't erupt in judgment. There was only quiet so vast, it ached. The silence was their answer, and silence became their sentence. God didn't strike them down as he would later do with Lucifer. He didn't bind them in chains as he did the Watchers. Instead, he did something far more terrifying. He folded their realm into the hush between verses. He buried it. Isaiah 25:7 speaks of a veil. He will destroy the shroud that enfolds all peoples, the sheet that covers all nations. What if that veil was first drawn not over mankind, but over a forgotten kingdom? Not to deceive, but to protect. For what if remembrance would unravel the new world before it even began? The realm of the eternal kings wasn't burned, it was sealed. Their dominion wasn't broken, it was hidden. Their names weren't erased, only left unspoken. God didn't unmake them, he made them unknowable. It was an act of mercy as much as judgment. To destroy them would have confirmed them as enemies. To exile them would have set them apart as fallen. But to bury them was to close the chapter without staining the page. Their stillness wasn't rebellion, but resistance to change. And for that, heaven responded with silence so deep it became myth, and myth became nothing. Traces in Scripture. The fingerprints remain. But eternity forgets nothing. And the veil, though drawn, was never perfect. Even in silence, echoes remain. The pages of Scripture, though edited by time and guarded by orthodoxy, still bear the fingerprints of a realm long buried. Genesis whispers first. In chapter 6, it speaks of the sons of God who saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and took them as wives. The flood that followed is often read as punishment for human wickedness. But what if it was more? A reset, not of man alone, but of dominion. These sons of God aren't called angels or demons, but something else, something older. Deuteronomy 32:8, in its oldest manuscripts, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, preserves a dangerous line. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided all mankind, he set up boundaries for the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. Not the sons of Israel, the sons of God, plural. A divine allotment, a council still active long after the buried realm was sealed. The book of Job cannot stay silent either. In its first chapter, we're told, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them." These sons aren't earthly. They're summoned, and they arrive as if their existence had never ended, only been moved out of sight. Even the prophets couldn't escape the weight of forgotten thrones. Ezekiel's vision of wheels within wheels, of thrones and sapphire beneath the feet of the glory has baffled scholars for centuries. It's not the imagery of one throne, it's the memory of many. And then there's the absence itself, the silence in Genesis, the unexplained us in "let us make man in our image," the plural that shouldn't exist if Yahweh ruled alone from the beginning. The divine voice that speaks as one but remembers as more. These aren't contradictions, they're cracks. And through those cracks, something shines, not darkness, but warning. Remnants among us, what is buried isn't always gone, and what's forgotten in doctrine may still remain in blood. If the eternal kings were sealed, their realm hidden from history, could their traces still echo through the story of redemption itself? Could their essence remain, not in heaven, but on earth. The scriptures don't speak this plainly, but they whisper. And those whispers point to remnants. Melchizedek appears without warning and departs without closure. He meets Abraham in the valley, offering bread and wine, not as a priest of Israel, which didn't yet exist, but as King of Salem, priest of God Most High. Genesis 14. Hebrews 7 shatters all explanation. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. This is no metaphor. This is a rupture in human lineage. A priest without origin, a king without coronation, a remnant. If he resembles the Son of God, could he be a shadow of what once stood beside him? A survivor of a realm now veiled? In Daniel 2, the prophet interprets a dream of kingdoms, gold, silver, bronze, iron, and finally clay mixed with iron. They will mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another. Daniel 2:43. Who is the they? Daniel doesn't explain, because some truths are shown, are not spoken. Some remnants aren't named, only revealed. The breaking of silence. And now, as we approach the end, the silence is thinning. Revelation 24 doesn't begin with angels. It begins with thrones. I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. The text offers no names, no explanations, just thrones, plural, reappearing after millennia of absence. Who sits upon them? Who returns to judge? And from where did they return? These thrones aren't metaphors. They are positions, real, restored, and authorized. Revelation isn't a new beginning. It is a remembering, a reckoning, a reopening of what had been shut. And if thrones return, so must the beings once bound to them. Then comes the fire. Then comes the white throne. Then comes a voice that declares, "The old has passed away. Behold, I make all things new." Revelation 21:1-5. But nothing truly passes until it's confronted. And heaven doesn't rebuild on forgetfulness. It rebuilds on judgment, restoration, and closure. Perhaps this is why the silence is cracking. Because the final war isn't between good and evil alone, but between what is true and what has been buried. The forgotten kings don't rise to fight. They rise to be seen, to be named, to be reconciled with the order they once wouldn't bow to. Will you kneel where they wouldn't? And so we come to you and me, born of dust and breath, standing at the edge of both stories, the one heaven buried and the one heaven is still writing. Deep within every human soul, there is a throne, and someone sits upon it. The eternal kings wouldn't kneel because they couldn't yield to a world no longer built for them. They stood for what they had always been, and in doing so, lost the world that was to come. But you have a choice they never fully understood. Will you bow where the eternal wouldn't? Will you surrender where the mighty refused? This isn't just a tale of kings forgotten. It's a mirror for what stands upon the throne of your heart. Not all who stand are righteous. Not all who kneel are weak. But all must choose. And heaven still remembers who did and who would not. If something ancient stirred in your spirit as you watch this video, subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts below. What do you think God buried before Genesis? And what happens when it rises again? Thank you for journeying with me through the veiled pages of Scripture. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most profound truths are the ones written in silence.